to 92.3. I've listened to so many different radio stations. And boy, was I lucky enough to listen to this voice coming up here, up onto the show, all about Raider Nation Radio. And joining us here, it's your boy Q Myers, going to be joining us here on the show. I got to tell you, Q, I am excited for Thursday night because this is finally when everything starts to make sense. How do you kind of anticipate this night? Because I'll be honest with you, the free agent market was outstanding, and I think this is going to be an unbelievable party and an unbelievable setting. How do you kind of view the NFL draft going on in Detroit Rock City on Thursday?
Well, the draft, to be full transparent, man, the draft is my favorite time of year. It really is. I get excited about the draft like you do. I just get to see all these other teams feel like that they got better. And we know some teams are going to get a lot better through the draft. And then we'll know other teams won't do so well. But it's like Christmas in April, right, for NFL fans. So I've always been a guy that grew up, on Saturdays and Sundays watching the draft all day long with my buddies and hanging out. And now it's obviously prime time starting on Thursday, like you mentioned. So yeah, man, it's exciting. It's really fun. And, obviously I'm here in Detroit covering the draft for the Raiders for Raider Nation Radio 920. And I'm excited about the opportunity to see what the Silver and Black are able to do at pick 13 or wherever they decide that they're going to make a pick.
So going back to, the Raiders season, because obviously there was change in leadership, and thank God they found the one that they knew meshed in with the culture. Because like I've said before, the Raiders, for years and years since I've watched them during the rivalries, I'm on the opposite. I've been a Charger fan since I was 7, but I loved the rivalry for one reason, because the Raiders always seemed like they were the rebels of the NFL. They always stuck it to Roger Goodell and the rest of the league. And now having Antonio Pierce as a full-time head coach, I love the attitude he brings to the table. I think a lot of players have been very invested up in that. So recapping this, I think this was the right move for the Raiders to really bring aboard a guy who's a players type coach, much like what we saw in Houston. So I think this is honestly going to be a boost of what's to come this next up and coming season. Am I right?
Yeah, that's what, Mark Davis was looking for when he made the move and he decided to put Antonio Pierce in that position as the interim head coach. He said he wasn't looking for a coach. He was looking for a leader. They needed leadership. The culture was broken in the locker room. He had talked to many different players that have big names like Josh Jacobs, Max Crosby, Devontae Adams, guys like that carry some weight, and they could see that there was something that was wrong with what was going on. So there needed to be a change. Mark Davis didn't know what it was going to be like under Antonio Pierce, but just had a gut feeling that was the right guy for the job because of the leadership qualities. And AP has wanted to be a coach in the league, and he's been a coach in high school and was a defensive coordinator there at Arizona State. And so he already had a little skins on the wall and kind of knew what it was supposed to look like. As you mentioned, as a player, obviously he knows what, how guys want to be coached up. So, with all that, he took the advantage of his opportunity and did really well. Had 9 games to coach up, went 5-4 down that stretch and earned the job as the head coach. So now him and Tom Telesco, a guy that very are familiar with from his time with the Chargers, are now in charge of the Raiders and this next chapter. What do they do moving forward? How do they build this team? How do they get guys in there that are Raiders and fit with what Antonio Pierce wants to do, what Patrick Graham wants to do, who Luke Getsy wants to do now as the offensive coordinator for the Silver and Black? So there's a lot coming up, man, this week. This Thursday, Friday, and Saturday is going to be a big deal as far as the maturation progress goes in this team, building this team, trying to make it the best they can. But this is the fun of it. This is why I'm here. I'm excited about it.
Christian Wilkins, honestly, I felt like that was my favorite move of the free agency. Why? Because finally Max Crosby gets a solid number 2 right there next to him. How do you kind of outlook this defensive front line? Because you could just tell from the way that the defense rolls from the interior all the way to the linebacker and then to the secondaries. These guys play hard when Max Crosby plays hard, and all you needed was a solid 2 that complements him. How did you feel about this signing? Because, I've heard it from a lot of friends of mine, Raider fans. They absolutely loved it, and they're ecstatic to see what the duo does this next season.
It was the piece that Antonio Pierce wanted. He told us at the combine that he wanted a guy in the middle that can collapse the pocket. big-time defensive tackle. Well, that's what Christian Wilkins is. Max Crosby brings it all the time. He doesn't take any plays off. He's always going 100 miles an hour. Even when he's injured, he's still going. He's that guy. Like, he always wants to be out there. Like he said, he didn't want to be great. He doesn't want to be a Hall of Famer. He wants to be a legend. And so he's trying to create that right now. The question of, someone across from him being his Robin has always been there. They tried to address that with Chandler Jones. Obviously, that didn't work. They drafted Tyree Wilson, but he was the guy that everyone knew was going to be brought on kind of slowly because of the foot injury that he suffered at school. So now he's able to get healthy. He's coming on. He came on strong at the end of the season. Malcolm Kuntz really developed towards the end of the season, had his career year for him. And then you bring in that guy, Christian Wilkins, in the middle. And then you add Adam Butler and John Jenkins. You bring those guys back, re-sign them. That's a big deal. But Wilkins is going to be the guy. He's going to be the key. Patrick Mahomes, he's not going to want to step up in the middle of the pocket because Wilkins will be right there. He's not going to want to go outside because Max is going to be right there. So now you create a big monster along that defensive line. And the Raiders' defense was the strength of the team last season. So now you have the opportunity to have your defense that was your strength be that much better with an addition to Christian Wilkins. He's still young, so he's not like he's an old dude just collecting a check. He's a young guy. He has that opportunity to really continue to grow and be who he could be, and do it with Max Crosby. It's going to make Max's job that much easier. It's going to make Christian's job that much easier as well.
Gosh, I am so excited for just a premier defense that finally, it's like I've been kind of dying for the Raiders to finally get something that will at the very least help to boost them from the previous ranks that we've been watching them for the last few seasons. So now that we kind of get an idea with the defensive side, let's talk about offense from here, because now they have a new kind of role with Lou Getsy. Now, I think the tenure in Chicago, it's unfortunate because Chicago has not been able to figure out offense for, since probably their existence. But, in the end, you got Devontae Adams. You got at least a couple of real good players. Now, it's unfortunate losing Josh Jacobs in the middle of this, but how do you kind of anticipate Lou Getsy to really run this offense? Are you going to kind of see a little bit of some creativity, or how do you kind of play this out?
That's a great question, right? And I don't think we know the answer to that until we see it, because what happened in Chicago wasn't very good. And I know that when he was hired, it wasn't something that everyone was thrilled about because of what happened in Chicago. It's like, wait, hold on. He wasn't able to succeed in Chicago with Justin Fields. Now he's going to come and succeed with Aiden O'Connell, or maybe Gardner Minshew, or maybe another quarterback that they could draft coming up in the next couple of days. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. I know what Antonio Pierce wants to do. He wants to run the hell out of the ball. I mean, that's just kind of who he is. He wants to be that guy that's running the ball downhill. You saw what Josh Jacobs was able to do after Antonio Pierce took over on November 1st. It really became a Josh Jacobs show. So I'm assuming that Zamir White's going to get a lot of burn. He's going to be the feature back this year for the Raiders. Alexander Madison was signed as a free agent, so he'll be a guy that spells them. I expect them to draft a running back as well. I think they're going to be heavy with the run game, but ultimately you got to put up points, man. So whether it's Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, or other, that quarterback's going to have to be on point with his receivers, his weapons out there, whether it's Devontae, Jacoby, Michael Mayer, whoever the case may be. They got to be on the same page and be able to get an offense that clicks, because that offense last year that they had didn't click, and they did the best they could after McDaniels got fired, but they were still working with McDaniels, his playbook. They had an interim offensive play caller, so there was a lot of inexperience. And by the way, Aiden O'Connell was a fourth-round rookie quarterback that only had one start under his belt before he took over on November 1st. So there's a lot to fix. They need to do a lot of repairing, a lot of heavy lifting on the offensive side of things.
So going to this draft Thursday night, I've been saying it at the start. I think this is honestly an NFL draft I don't think I honestly have ever seen, probably since 2020 and maybe further and beyond. There's going to be mixtures. There's talks about quarterbacks. There's talks about offensive tackles and a loaded wide receiver room. Anything could be a possibility up to this point, but I've got my third and final mock draft as well later on in the bottom half of the hour, but kind of evaluating with the Raiders right now at 13, because a lot of this quarterback talk and a lot of these wide receivers and offensive tackles, how do you kind of feel is anticipating with the room right now with the Raiders? They kind of feel a little comfortable, or is there kind of a little bit of some rumors that might be shaking up here?
I think that I think everything's on the table, to be honest. They're in a position where they can do a lot of different things. We heard from Tom Telesco today, the Raiders GM, and he said we have a plan to be aggressive and move up if the time presents itself, an opportunity presents itself. they can do that. And I'm assuming, and I think anyone in Raider Nation is assuming that if they do move up, it's to try to find a way to go get Jaden Daniels, which is going to be very difficult to do. But if they do aggressively trade up, like Tom Telesco said, I'm assuming that that's who it would be for. They can stay there at 13. They can pick the best offensive lineman. There's multiples that they could choose from. They need to address the right side of the offensive line. So I can see Fuaga out of Oregon State being an option for them. They have other guys there. Latham out of Alabama they can go for. Guyton out of Oklahoma they can get probably a little bit later. But and there's guys that they can address that offensive line with. I think that cornerback is something that they're looking at, like Terrion Arnold from Alabama, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. I think those guys are firmly in play. And that's I think that there's a lot of different players that are going to be there available. Even Byron Murphy. I know defensive tackle is not a position of need, but oh man, you want to talk about having another dude along your defensive line. I mean, that's a bloodthirsty pirate right there in Byron Murphy. I think that he would really add to the Raiders defensive line. So they're in a position where, in my opinion, they can't really mess it up unless they just really mess it up. And I just don't think with Tom Telesco and his experience that he has at this, I don't think he's going to mess it up. So I think the Raiders are going to come away with somebody pretty good on Thursday that Raider Nation will be pretty happy with.
So it's funny you bring that up because a lot of my evaluations for the Raiders in general is because, knowing Tom Telesco in his track record, he's hit on, wide receivers. I mean, I know a lot of people kind of go from recency bias with, Quinn Johnston, but it's like you can't really, condemn the kid because of his rookie season that just didn't really pan out. There was coaching issues. There was all sorts of stuff. But he's responsible for Justin Herbert. He's responsible, for a lot of really good key factor players. So it kind of brings a lot of really good confidence in the, in the Raiders war room. But my evaluation looking at the Raiders, love your thoughts up on this. So if you mentioned about cornerback, because that's exactly with what I thought that the Raiders would do. My first mock draft, I had them taking Terrion Arnold. My second, I had them taking Quinyon Mitchell. But my third mock draft, and this might be interesting, I had them maybe potentially taking Nate Wiggins. I'm starting to hear some good things about that. I just think because with the Raiders, quarterback, depending on it, I mean, there's some quarterbacks that could fall in the second, third round. We've been hearing a lot of some hidden gems up in there. But I think from corner, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like the corner was the need because you got to help a little more of that secondary because, I mean, especially when you got your safeties with Trayvon Merrick and you've got, Epps out there in the secondary. I think adding a boost to the corner could really help to solidify to help the Raiders make a solid shutdown secondary, especially if you're playing really good offensive receivers and you're trying to disrupt the quarterback play. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've firmly been in the camp of, a Terrion Arnold or a Quinyon Mitchell for a long time. I actually mocked Terrion Arnold to the Raiders just the other day. And one was because I do think that would be a big upgrade in their secondary, go with Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs. And Antonio Pierce told us that. He told us that at the Combine. He said, hey, we need an alpha dog to go across from Jones and Hobbs. I mean, he literally told us that. So, yeah, I think that that's something that needs to happen, something that they need to grab. I'm more of Mitchell or Arnold guy as opposed to a Wiggins. But I mean, I guess you pick your flavor of whatever you choose, whatever you prefer. I think Wiggins will probably be the last corner taken in the first round. But I mean, again, he's a first round corner, so I think he's still really good. It's just not the one that I'm looking at. I think if you're going to get one at 13, you either get Arnold or you get Mitchell, whichever one's there. Also, there's a nice relationship that AP has with Terrion Arnold. He had that at the Combine. You saw it at the Pro Day. So Antonio Pierce, from what I know, really likes guys that he has good relationships with. He's good at building those. He was, the defensive coordinator there at Arizona State, but he was also the recruiter. So he built relationships. That's who he is. He likes to go and base a lot of his decisions off the relationships he's built. That's why he pounded the table for Jack Jones when he was cut by the Patriots. The Raiders picked him up off of waivers. He knew him. Hey, I knew this guy since he was 13 years old. I knew Jack when he was little. I recruited him to here. I recruited him to there. Wanted him on the Raiders. And now, he's got a really good corner in Jack Jones. And, that's why they're trying to get Jaden Daniels. Same thing. Recruited him when he was in high school. So he knows him when he was a little kid. So there's a lot of ties that Antonio Pierce has around the league, especially with these guys coming into the league this year. Even has a relationship with a guy like Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco right now because he was there at Arizona State. So, I mean, there's a lot that you can kind of tie back to Antonio Pierce, which is making this even more exciting for the Raiders because you just don't know what direction that they'll go. But they have a lot of different options that they can definitely choose. Cornerback, I believe, has got to be one of them.
So I would assume, because honestly, when I look at the draft, I said it when I watched Quinion Mitchell from like his game film at Toledo and then watching him at the combine. I feel like he is this year's Tariq Woolen that we got from Seattle because he's a ball hawk. He's a guy that's a big time disruptor. And I think that's a guy that I think he's honestly going to be the sweet deal right there for any of the defenses trying to boost up and really kind of disrupt opposing offenses. So, the AFC West, lots of things have been shaking up. Now we know we know that Denver found their guy in Sean Payton. Now the Chargers found their guy in Jim Harbaugh, and they're sitting at 5. That's going to be an interesting night for sure. There's lots of different, predictions, lots of possibilities. I mean, the Raiders have to really shake this up. I think that's kind of the thought, right? You go into an AFC West. I think the West is going to be much more competitive than what we got last season. I mean, from due to injuries, due to inconsistencies all around in that division. So I think AP and Tom Telesco is probably looking at this thing like, not only do we got to ace this draft, but we got to have guys that bring in juice, that bring in attitude, and the guys that are ready to shake the tables in this division, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the goal is to beat the Chiefs in the division. The Chiefs will own the division. I mean, I don't care if it's Denver, I don't care if it's the Chargers, I don't care if it's the Raiders. The Chiefs own the division, so you've got to find a way to beat them. Antonio Pierce understands that. The last game the Chiefs won or lost was against the Raiders on Christmas in Kansas City, and that was because the Raiders were able to score 2 defensive touchdowns. That's something that you can't count on all the time. So for anybody who gets excited about that and says, oh, man, look, they got the recipe. Not really, because 2 defensive touchdowns aren't going to happen consistently. You've got to find a way to consistently beat those dudes. So that's why you bolster the defense. That's why you go get a guy like a Christian Wilkins. That's why you go add an alpha dog into the secondary. That's why you go and make sure that the back end is taken care of. You make sure that those linebackers are where they need to be. The defense has to be solid. You've got to slow down Patrick Mahomes if you can. Also, on the other side, you've got to be able to score. If you can't score, again, you can't rely on 14 points defensively to win you games. It's not going to happen consistently. So you might get lucky every once in a while and win on Christmas and your fan base gets fired up. That's awesome. But if you want to be a winner consistently, you've got to find a way to compete and score with Patrick Mahomes. And we saw him in the Super Bowl. He can score when he needs to score. So the Raiders have to figure that out. But the division should be competitive. All these coaches are going to get after each other. These teams are going to get after each other. The Chargers have a winner. Peyton is a winner. Obviously, Andy Reid's a winner, and Antonio Pierce won as a player. So, I mean, there's winners all over the field and all over the division. They just got to figure out what's going to happen, how it's going to all shake out. You know, the Broncos added Zach Wilson to the mix today, and, you know, that's another quarterback in the room. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just another quarterback in the room. So obviously they're still going to try to address their quarterback position at in round 1 on Thursday at pick 12, unless they try to move up and go get somebody. So yeah, man, it's going to be a lot of moving going on in the whole division, not just with the Raiders, but all the teams as they're trying to compete with those guys named the Chiefs.
Yeah, man. I mean, the energy and the vibe, man. I'm excited for this up on Thursday night, and I'm excited for what's to come, in the next season. I think it's going to be great. I think a lot of teams, there's a lot of wants, there's a lot of needs, there's a lot of stuff that also, too, could really, really shake things up. Fire question here before I let you go. Do you have a sleeper in mind? And it could be anybody up onto this draft, but do you have somebody in mind that could really take the league by surprise?
That's a good question. The guy I've been talking about a lot is Byron Murphy, just because I think he's really good. And the defensive tackle group is not that deep in this draft. And you see all the veteran defensive tackles, how much money they're getting paid. Christian Wilkins, we talked about him a bunch, how much he got paid from the Raiders, almost $100 million. Chris Jones just got $100-something million from the Chiefs, right? You're seeing Matabuke got paid a lot of money from the Ravens. All these defensive, even Leonard Williams got paid a lot of money, and he's not even really, performing and putting up that kind of numbers right now in Seattle, but he got paid as well. So Byron Murphy is a guy that I'm really intrigued to see where he goes. I think that he's going to be a hell of a player. And like I said, if the Raiders were to grab him at 13, I wouldn't be mad at that either, even though it's not a need. As far as guys that could just, end up really showing out in the league and nobody's really, talking that much about him. I mean, I'm looking at a guy like Blake Corum, the running back out of Michigan. I think that he's a dog. I like what he brings to the table. I love the fact that he could have left and gone to the league and decided to return and go and win a national championship there at Michigan, even though he had that knee injury that sidelined him at the end of the last year. And so I thought that was really cool. Dylan Johnson is another running back that I'm looking at out of Washington. I think that's part of the reason why Michael Penix wasn't very good in the final in the national championship game, is because he didn't have Dylan Johnson. He had a high ankle sprain. So he's a guy that I think could be a really good player. He's not the fastest dude, but he's just a guy that'll get you all the tough yards in between the tackles. So I look at him to be a good player, and he's probably going to be a late round pick. Trying to think, Spencer Rattler is a guy that people are talking about. Jordan Travis could be a very intriguing player as well. He hurt his lower leg. He's the reason Florida State didn't make the playoffs in the college football. And he could be, once he's healthy, he could end up being a sneaky pick for somebody. But Spencer Rattler, I like him a lot. I was really down on him when I saw him at Oklahoma. I was wondering what was going on with him after all the hype. And he goes to South Carolina, turn things around. He's got a lot of people talking about him right now. So those are a few players that I'm looking at that could end up being big impactful players in the league.
Yeah, I think, a couple of them on my mind. I mean, a lot of people are just kind of sleeping on Bo Nix, but I just feel like because of the experience, the college starts, he feels a lot like a Sean Payton guy, because especially when he had Drew Brees, I think this totally works for him. A lot of people, they kind of think, well, he doesn't have the accuracy, doesn't have the arm. But usually when you go into situations like this, they could change up, they could adjust their game, and I think that's where they're going to get the most of it. I think a couple of them, like Jalen Wright and Marshawn Lloyd, I've watched these running backs, and they've got great cuts. They've got great vision when it comes to evaluating the offensive line and the opposing defenses where they're setting. And when they burst through on that afterburner, they are gone. And these guys are going to be really, really interesting to watch. But I think a really good one, and Byron Murphy's a real good one that I've watched as well. But I honestly do think I'm curious of what the second round receivers are going to be like. Xavier Legette. I think the size, I think the hands, and I also do think he kind of gives me a little bit of like an A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf type, but he's got a better head on his shoulders. And I think honestly, he'll be a guy that some teams might be looking at if they're looking for size, they're looking for contested plays. A guy that's really going to attack at both of those. So I think he might be an interesting one, but there are so many of them, and I think that's what's so exciting about the draft Thursday night, but I cannot end up waiting for it. Q, absolutely love the work that you do, man. Where can people find you for everything Locked On Raiders, and where they can also tune in on your radio station, man?
Yeah, you got me Raider Nation Radio 920, 2 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. Unnecessary Roughness every day. Of course, the Locked On Raiders podcast, anywhere you find your podcast. We're on YouTube. Of course, that's the video side of things, and then the audio, wherever you get your podcast from. On Twitter, at your boy Q254. You could always find me there. And then even Instagram, starting to do a little with that. At your boy Q Sports, you can find me there as well. Like I said, just doing a little bit of dibbling and dabbling there, but I'm always doing something. And then ESPN Radio as well. Game night, 7 to 10 p.m. Pacific time. Do that too. So do a little bit of everything.
There you go, man. Hey, by the way, tell JT the Brick I said hey, man, because I've been on his show multiple times, expressing my thoughts. Love the work that you guys end up doing there for Raider Nation Radio. Keep up the great work. Excited for what the draft night is going to be. Good luck to the Raiders. And, man, we are excited to see what lies ahead for the Raiders moving forward. Thanks, man. Take care of yourself.
All right, brother. You too. Appreciate you, my man.
Absolutely. Well,
hey there, everyone. Thanks for watching. Make sure that you guys like, follow, and subscribe to get the latest from the show. Also, go check out a few of our coolest segments that we've had from previous shows. And also make sure that you stay up to date on the show on all platforms, wherever you guys find your podcasts.